Very good afternoon. After having a great conversation by Professor, it's very difficult for me to sit here and moderate the panel on the Minnesota startup ecosystem. But I'm very delighted that the kind of panelists we are here. Let me tell you that why this panel is. So a couple of years back when during the COVID, I decided to come out after creating health systems and hospital system in one of the most underserved region in the world. I was looking to unlearn the way I've been developing and learn new way of doing it. When I looked around the world, and I found a bright spot here in Minnesota. I look across the Europe, I look for US, both East and West Coast. But this ecosystem pretty much aligned to me. It's have a great hospital system. It have a great medtech companies. Medtronic did a great job during pandemic providing ventilators across the world, as well as one of the biggest in payers group, including UnitedHealth is here. And I was saying that is not only that, the policy system, that's pretty active here. This is one of the best outcome indicator in the US. So not only this ecosystem, but the policymakers is also very actively working here. But the question is that the AI is coming as a disruption. Do this established player is going to make the Minnesota still a great value and reckon in healthcare? That's what we are looking to discuss in this panel. So along with me, so have a great panelist, Geof. Geof is principal at Medical Alley Start. I hope that many have been asking that, where is the Medical Alley since morning? So he's the one who recently moved out from Solventum and joined Medical Alley. And before that, he was part of Merck Digital Studio in the East Coast. And he developed so many ventures. And he is PhD in cell biology and the BS Bachelor of Science in the molecular biology. Along with that, we have Mary Grove. She is transplanted, the way she says that, from the West Coast to the Minnesota and Midwest. And she is the managing partner of the Bread and Butter Venture. And along with that, she have been also co-founded Silicon North Stars to empower underserved youth in tech. And she have been in the past worked with Google startup venture, and she created thousands of startups and supported them across the world. I like you to welcome both of our panelists. So I like to go back to Geof, understanding being a Medical Alley, which have been pretty glue for all the ecosystem here. We have great hospital system and peer group, as well as medical device. So what you see that's a strategic resource which Minnesota have, and even though you are new to this role, but what's your understanding of what are the untapped potentials which Minnesota have?
Yeah, so there you go. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you. This is awesome. So yeah, what I'm seeing across the ecosystem, what are the resources and that potential to tap into? It is a remarkably unique ecosystem, like you outlined so well, right? I mean, you've got major hospitals, right, especially Mayo Clinic. You've got major payers, especially UHG. You've got Medtronic and a whole lot of large companies here, as well as a lot of startups. I think that in itself is a unique resource to have that consolidated in a region and accessible, and all within a ecosystem that I think is uniquely collaborative and uniquely very mission-driven. And so aside from the more common things like the partnerships that you'll see, I've seen a lot of just engagement through like mentorship and coaching and engaging with the ecosystem. So I'd say that is one resource that will continue, hopefully, to be tapped into. But then I think on the topic of AI, especially, like data is a massive thing that you can't ignore. And having done a lot of that myself in the past, right? Like that's really kind of the gas that goes into the engine. And so I know there's a lot of groups in the area. For example, I know Mayo is doing some awesome stuff with their data and with Mayo Clinic platform. Gillette Children's as well is doing, as well as many other systems and organizations. So a lot of opportunity there for sure.
So you work in the Boston, which is another hub.
Yeah.
So what do you see the advantage Minnesota have and disadvantage as compared to the health ecosystem, which is supporting startup?
Yeah, I guess comparatively, I mean, for one, it's easier to get around. Yeah, I think in Minnesota, it does feel like more of a confluence of all those resources together. And it's also, I think, a more diverse set of resources. Something that I think happens a lot in the Boston ecosystem is it's obviously very biotech, biopharma focused with, the healthcare providers there as well. But here, of course, you've got heavy device, medtech, that sort of thing. But in my opinion, my 2 cents, I feel like there's more of a confluence intersection there. And then, I think, things that I saw out there that I'd love to see more of here. I mean, one thing I hear a lot as, in my role with Medical Alley, we put on like events and community building and things like that. Would love to see even more of that, like more symposiums and summits like this, right? I seriously hear, I think, we try to put more out there, and even if there's 3 things every day during a week, I constantly hear, I wish there was more. I wish I could go to more. And so I think there's a big opportunity to just continue to build that community and connect people.
Sure. Mary, you moved from West Coast to Minnesota, and now you are an investor here. So how you see that some of the infrastructure which is here, that's a strategic advantage, especially in terms of investment you make it in the health AI space. What are those?
Yes, well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the conversation. I'm thrilled and honored. And yes, so I, in my role as managing partner at Bread and Butter Ventures, we are deploying capital into emerging tech startups, high growth tech companies, very specifically in 3 verticals. So healthcare, which I lead, the food system, food technology, which my partner Brett leads, and then enterprise SaaS B2B. So if you look across those sectors, the one thing we have in common is they map directly to the strength of the enterprise backbone that we have here in Minnesota. And so I moved here 7 years ago. Yes, I'm a Minnesotan by marriage, but also a Minnesotan by choice now. And I think, I had a long career in Silicon Valley. I worked at Google for 15 years, started working on the IPO deal team, spent 7 years doing early stage product, business development, emerging market expansion. And then I built the Google for Startups organization there, which worked in over 100 countries and really just fell in love with early stage. And with this concept that we need to work hard to democratize access to capital because there's so much opportunity in places like Minnesota in emerging markets within the US and all around the world. And so that premise brought me here along with the 75-person family I inherited on my husband's side, right? Wanting to, that perfect bullseye alignment of professional and personal. I had 1-year-old twins at the time who are heading into 3rd grade now. And professionally, with my interest in early stage, deciding to go full-time the venture route, this truly is a remarkable market, and it's only continued to become more so. But I would say the very thesis of our firm, Bread and Butter Ventures, is the embodiment of a lot of that potential that I see. And coming from my corporate background, but that corporate innovation, working with emerging tech in a large industry, is the opportunity that I see in Minnesota, that I have become completely obsessed with, which is we are home to the highest concentration of Fortune 500 companies per capita in the nation, bar none. And beyond just Fortune 500, think about other large enterprises here, right? In healthcare alone, over 1,000 companies, ranging from 2-person startup to UnitedHealth and everything in between here. And so the aha for me and the call to action for our ecosystem is nobody is leveraging that resource at scale from a venture perspective, and those large corporations are hungry to work with emerging tech. There's just no easy flywheel today, like we have in some of these markets that are denser, like Silicon Valley. And so I'm incredibly bullish to be here. We still invest, Bread and Butter, we invest nationally, coast to coast. About 20% of our portfolio of 78 companies is Minnesota-based, but the rest are, from Boston to San Francisco and everything in between. I will say, just in closing, the last two healthcare investments that we made this year both have AI in the name, so VoiceCare AI and NibbleMind AI. And so very relevant to today's topic, AI, the disruption is occurring at a rate faster than anything I've seen in my career, and it's really exciting to be a part of a conversation like this.
So you work with Google, and you was based out of West Coast. So what advantage you see in terms of a health ecosystem and investment into that when you look for Midwest, especially Minnesota?
Yes, and I worked in the Bay Area. I worked in New York for 5 years. I worked in Zurich, back to New York, and back to the Bay Area. So I've just spent all my time in larger cities. And it's been really interesting to come to Minnesota because we have a lot going for us, and we also have so much untapped potential and opportunity that feels very, very urgent to me. From a healthcare perspective, though, we do have that infrastructure that we spoke of earlier from the health systems, the payers, the startups, some of the large global corporations. We have a policy environment. One of the best things we have going for us here, I believe, is our size. As a state of 5 million-ish people, it's enough to be meaningful from a sample size, but it's small enough to move quickly and agile and to test things that aren't at the scale of we're launching in California, we're launching in Texas, we're launching in New York. And so that collaboration, as we speak, one of our portfolio companies, a healthcare company, Gabby, they do AI risk assessment platform for screenable cancer, starting with breast cancer, with the goal of driving early detection and extending the care ecosystem for health systems. She's on a plane from New York, and while she's here, she's going to be meeting with 3 of the large health systems here, with Medical Alley, and with Minnesota Oncology, for example, and that's a 2-day trip, right? And so our pitch to entrepreneurs is, you might not be based here. One, we think this is the best market to build a healthcare startup. But 2, if you're not based here, work with investors who are. Shout out to our co-investors. Pam York is here. You heard from her earlier from Capital 3. We're co-investors in that particular company, Gabby. The company is based in New York. And so just to show that we have strength in winning in competitive situations and attracting the best talent because of what we have here. But we very much have to work together to collaborate because so much happens in silos in the ecosystem.
Great, thanks, Mary. Touching on all those. Coming to Geof. Geof, Minnesota have a great infrastructure and touched on the data, but majority of these data don't talk with each other, especially in healthcare.
Yeah.
And if we have to tap the potential of healthcare AI or any AI things, we need to have easy access of the data, especially medtech devices. They are looking very actively that's how they can have that access to. So as a medical alley, so what your vision on that part and what you see the challenges and how you see to address that?
Yeah, so definitely a lot of challenges in that. From where I'm sitting, I've seen a few different models that people are trying, and I think people are still figuring that out. So we touched on Mayo's one that always comes to mind with their platform. That's basically like a sub-organization that, I'm sorry, there's probably people here that are like, I'm butchering the explanation, but it's basically kind of split across a variety of verticals that address the data in different ways. And so, for example, there's the Mayo Clinic platform, like Accelerate, which does a lot with the startups. So I think that's a really cool way to start to get the data out there to groups that can use it. And then I think I mentioned like Gillette Children's as well, having set up their company Kid Sites, which I think is doing really cool stuff. So that's more of like a standalone organization that's trying to bridge that gap between the data sitting in this large organization in ways it can be used by innovators. I think getting to your question on how you can put that all together and make it more interoperable, it's a good question. Probably something we could grab beers after and talk through, because I think that's a really big one. But I think, from my perspective, at least people are trying to make the data more accessible right now. If you think like fair, right, findable, accessible, the interoperability part, I think, will probably still need some work, but people are going in that direction.
So like if any startup which is here and how Medical Alley helped them with tie-up with some of these hospital systems to get the access of the data. Do you have any role in that? And
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, we make those connections all the time. So as groups come in, I literally was just doing that earlier this week with some of the hospital systems where startups would say, hey, we are looking to leverage this type of data for, I don't know, something they want to do with real world evidence or whatever it is. Maybe it's, building some research models. Connecting them with the right people at the right organizations. So from their side, it's making the right connections to data that could be useful to them. And then likewise, on the other side, we find it's very much appreciated, right, when someone who's sitting maybe on a hospital system side that wants to work with companies for data, they can make those right fits as well early on instead of getting wrapped up in maybe the meetings where it's just going to be passing along to something else.
On that note, I'll give a quick plug and an offer for the company we just invested in recently. I shared it's called NimbleMind AI. They're based in Chicago and New York, and they're building a multimodal data platform for clinical healthcare data specifically. Right, the idea that organizations, large and small, are sitting often on a treasure trove of data that isn't usable. You can't train LLMs. They're early, they're moving quickly, and I know we have a lot of researchers in the audience. So if you're interested in potentially having early access to that, as a beta partner, let me know, shoot me a note. It'd be great to connect on that. But I think we're making investments in companies that we think are building that platform infrastructure level capability versus a point solution that's built on top of this data, right? So think of it as like a scale AI, what they're doing for healthcare data specifically. So I think that's, from a venture backable perspective, seeing a ton of interest in these platform software, vertical SaaS solutions within healthcare.
Good to hear, Mary. That's a Chicago-based company. We want such companies to be based in Minnesota. So we want you to, that's why this summit is, one of us to catalyze
We need so much more capital, for sure.
Yeah, so much the resources which we have, how we can catalyze and have, still the Minnesota need to be upfront of this health AI space. So coming back to understand some of why you invested in, you have venture capital located here, but you invest across the US. So coming back to understand that, what are some gaps you see that, which you have to think beyond the Minnesota ecosystem?
Definitely. I think just to paint the picture for you from a macro perspective, I put some numbers on my name tag so I wouldn't forget them. Just the venture capital market more broadly. So if you look at the global venture capital market in 2024, there was $365 billion of VC funding deployed in 2024 globally, $365 billion, which represents a 5% year-over-year increase from the previous year. So that's the overall pie. Artificial intelligence companies, so AI just dominated. So 131 billion of that 365 went to AI first, or primarily AI-driven technology startups. So you look at 365 billion, 209 billion of that, so a little over 44% was US. So US still leads the way in terms of venture capital deployment. So 209 billion deployed in the US last year. Guess what Minnesota's number is? 725 million with an M in 2024, and that represents a 22% decrease from the 2 years prior, from 2022. So just by the numbers, right, Minnesota-based companies are lagging behind the broader macro in terms of how much startups based here are deploying. There are a lot of reasons for that, and there's just not enough capital in our market. Our firm, anecdotally, so we have 78 investments I mentioned. We just closed our newest Fund 4 in January of this year. So it's a new $40 million vehicle. About half of our capital, so we raise capital from institutions, coast to coast, and from individuals as well. We frankly wouldn't have been able to raise that fund without seeking capital outside of our state. So 50% of our capital is from outside of Minnesota. We have wealth in the state, in the market. This is a town of the Fortune 500 stat that I quoted to you earlier, right? It's a question to me. The call to action is, how do we mobilize more access, visibility, and education for venture capital as an asset class? It is a high-risk asset class, for sure. My role as a fund manager is to to invest responsibly and ensure people understand what they're investing in, but it's also very, very high reward and has a place in a balanced portfolio. And so I think the biggest gap is what we have going for us is we actually don't have to go outside of our market to become a Silicon Valley, to become the Minnesota version, which is, I would argue, more powerful in a focused sector-specific way. So this is a conversation about moving the whole ecosystem forward by leveraging what is right in front of us. But this is a, and I think maybe as an insider, outsider, I hope I can say this, humbly, we're missing that rapid urgency. Fear of failure is holding us back too, right? In the valley where I moved from, it's almost a badge of honor. It's like, I'm on my third startup, one crashed and burned. Here's what I learned. Let's do it again. We just backed a founder who we invested in our very first fund, and that company shut down and failed. But we were the first check into his new company. It was because of the way he handled, ran the business, the way he communicated, the way he shared his learnings. And failures, not only is it fine, it can be great. I guarantee you the second time around is going to be better. And so I think that's culturally, there's a gap and there's a huge opportunity. And the good news for us, again, we don't have to look very far outside of our backyard. The resources are here.
So I would the same.
I was just going to build on it because I'd even actually, Mary, love your thoughts, but I feel like there's also a big opportunity for some of the other types of venture models as well, right? So in the area, I think of like a Flagship Pioneering or a Third Rock or a Curie Bio, which are, I jokingly will say, they're like companies that make companies, right? Or these kind of like venture studio models, or these they're not quite like traditional VC, but they're these groups that can deploy capital into, say, companies that they're making internally or creating in partnerships with universities. I feel like I see a huge opportunity there as well. I love your thoughts though. Sorry, not to ask a question as a panelist, but just from the VC perspective as well.
So
I think that the traditional venture capital model is just but one very specific way to finance a company, and it's often not the right way. It's certainly not the right way for every business, but it gets glorified, or it's maybe one of the only more prominently known paths. So that's a very good question, right? Is how do we attract, whether it's revenue-based financing or venture is a very, very specific business model, right? We have our annual investor meeting tomorrow, right? Our job is to return the capital in a fixed period of around 10-ish years, right? If we don't continue to do that, we're out of a job. And so I think but is that the model for every business? No. And so I do think it's very much about introducing the right financing at the right time for the right company.
So coming to your earlier point that you raise fund 50% outside the Minnesota state, but Minnesota is a home to 16 Fortune 500 companies. And if you see the per capita of the state also is much higher than average US. So what reason made you, when we have so many big institutions who have so much money, they're investing money into VC and private equity sector outside the state, going to the coast, investing there, both sides. So what reason do you see that they are not able to see and get convinced that they need to invest in the Minnesota market?
We'll get them for Fund 5 is the goal. But honestly, these are long-term relationships, right? And so my favorite, well, I probably should pick a favorite type, but my favorite type of limited partner or LP investor is a corporate one, actually, because they're extremely aligned. We usually are in to get healthcare and food corporations who invest strategically because they want to see access to early stage technology. And for us, that's a win-win-win because our portfolio companies are more likely to get a pilot, a commercial deal, a co-investment, maybe a path to M&A. So it truly is alignment of incentives that makes it a slam dunk. But I'll tell you anecdotally, for many of the LPs in our fund have told me, you're the exception because i.e. you are the only Minnesota-based fund or one of two or one of three that we've invested in. We prefer to invest in the coast, right? And so we just need time. We need a few cycles under belt to continue to put up strong results. And I still believe that innovation happens everywhere, and it's not a bad thing at all. I don't view it as a bad thing. My goal is not to ever raise a fund fully in Minnesota or have a portfolio that is only in Minnesota, of portfolio companies. But my goal is that we be the front door to the ecosystem, see every deal that comes out of this market, and we're very specific sector focused. So if it's not a fit for us or because of stage, I want to help connect you to one of the 600 firms in our network. But the whole ecosystem rises when we all do better together. And when I first moved here 7 years ago, an early member of the Minnesota Investors Network, which at the time was about 5 or 6 of us gathering at the same restaurant in St. Anthony, Maine, once a quarter for breakfast. And it was 5 or 6, and we would just literally go around the table and talk about a recent deal we had made, what we're excited about. Now that group is, I think it's 38 members is the largest count. And the rules for being in it are you have to be deploying institutional capital actively and have an investor based in Minnesota. So that's just a great data point of we're early, 30-something is still, small, but it's growing. So there's signs of a lot to be hopeful about.
Wish you for the Fund 5 and look forward to touching that. You have much more investment to
Thank you.
support the
Thank you.
AI and startups, which is looking to have fun. So we look forward.
We get a little break and then we'll be back at it.
Yeah.
It's definitely something I hear though, as well, right? When I talk to VCs on the medical alley side, right, and asking, okay, what can I do to be helpful, right? Or what do you need? Those types of questions. LPs come up a lot, right, as far as making those connections. And yeah, just to echo, Mary, what you're saying, right? I mean, it's definitely something I'm hearing a lot as well is, how can you connect me to more Minnesota LPs, and how can I get those intros? How can I find the folks that I should be talking to? I think there's some work to be done there. Is all.
So along with that, Geof, I'd like to touch more beyond the financials. What other big challenge you see, which you see as obstacle to be a health AI startup pipeline to be in Minnesota, from Medical Alley perspective?
Yeah, so from what I'm seeing, obstacles, I mean, the risk capital is definitely a big one. I think, again, as Mary, as you were saying, right, AI is something that has become very, very big, and it's moving fast, and it's very disruptive. And so I think, to me, and what I'm seeing is that also will demand a lot of continued talent development as well, and just making sure that we're keeping up with the pace of the field, and from the university setting or the educational setting, especially, just making sure that that's being integrated into what the needs are, and continuing to provide the best preparation to enter that space and to do good work there. Honestly, to me, usually it comes down to the risk capital and talent are the things, and just continue to build on it.
For me, a thought there is that we've been talking about this so much internally as a team, because often in healthcare, right, and we're B2B investors, so we don't invest in direct-to-consumer facing businesses as much as we prefer. We invest in companies that are selling into health systems, health plans, provider networks. Those are long sales cycles, and it's hard and expensive to build a healthcare company, a startup. And so typically we look at companies, the 2 I'm in diligence with right now have both been around for 4 years, but they're raising their seed or seed extension round. With AI, things are different, right? You meet a company now that I started 4 months ago, and I'm live in market, and I have customers and revenue, and it feels like a decade ago when the falling cost of software sort of democratized the pace at which you could start a business. Version 1, version 2 feels so much faster. And so we think about from a VC perspective, the tech is there. I'm not going to call it a commodity, but the tech is much more accessible. There's sort of an equalizer component there. So for us, actually, of course we care about the tech differentiation if there is defensibility, but we care almost more right now about the go-to-market. Do you have a unique jump start on the go-to-market in some way? And I would argue that in Minnesota, we have the opportunity to push that forward here quickly, especially if we work together. And so I'm excited, but I would say go-to-market. So if you're thinking about building a company or launching a company, what are your fastest paths to market in a long enterprise cycle? Is it we're going to go test with smaller specialty clinics that we can get up and running with quickly to get data? Is it we're going to give it away for free first to get people's data? It comes down to data. But this AI is once again, causing this democratization of who has access to build quickly.
That is such a good point. I was just, sorry, I'm interrupting a little bit, but I was just going to build on it too. When I used to sit on the big company side at Merck as well, right? It was so much, to your point around go-to-market, it also depended so much on the startup or the company's ability to understand the the regulatory hurdles, not just that they were going to face, but that their customers were going to face. Understanding the cybersecurity requirements I saw overlooked a lot, which I think is so important, like you're saying, that those differentiate companies come into. So yeah, that's totally it.
Good to hear that. And the way the Health AI Institute is, we are not only think tank, like having such discussion, but also do tank. So coming to that, I like to ask what specific initiative you like to see, which is going to be very catalytic in next 2 to 3 years to having such great ecosystem here on the health AI startup space.
So many good thoughts. Yeah, it's
I
like
know, yeah,
we've covered good ground. I mean,
yeah.
I think it comes down to a lot of some of the core themes, like the wish list is threefold. One, to keep reiterating, right, just our ability to mobilize more capital, early stage capital, risk capital, grant capital, which is very much in flux right now, both at state and federal levels. It's all, like, we have to fund the work, whether that's for-profit, venture-backed, or elsewhere. So that's one. Two is more of industry and venture tech haven't always we haven't always spoken the same language. So I think to the extent we continue to have unified conversations, some of these open access data initiatives, incredibly important. How do we kind of simplify and have industry and tech venture community talk with each other? And then to your point about the Think Do Tank, and I'm grateful that the Health AI Institute has started here and chosen to start here, because I do think that we don't know. We know that AI regulation will should come, I believe, but we're building the plane while we're flying it. And so I think to the extent that we can be having an integrated conversation, not parallel conversations, it's just going to be so helpful. And there's going to be a steep learning curve for everybody in the industry, myself included, and to the extent that we're all learning together and exposing blind gaps and asking questions that feel, like I didn't know the model that you were referring to for the other alternative form of capital. Like, let's just have the same conversation and ask about it, right? So I think it's those three ingredients.
Great. I think what I'm hearing from you both, that you're very positive about the future of the health AI, and we look forward to working with you. We have here University of Minnesota, which is a great research university, which have a great resource, and they are one of the pioneers in the AI space. Not only today, but since inception of the supercomputer. So this is one of the hub of AI, and we have a great health center. We should definitely engage them to building such a partnership so that we can have. And University of Minnesota is also great investor in the VC firm. So that could be another strategic angles to be engaging with them. We're really looking forward to, but I'm opening the audience to have questions if they have. Jim.
Yeah, thanks. A terrific panel, great insights. So we're sitting in the Humphrey Institute of Public Policy for this. I'd like to ask kind of what your view is of the policy environment or policy assists that could help in improving the medtech venture startup market in Minnesota. For example, I heard mentioned in a meeting recently that Minnesota's state pension fund doesn't have any mandate to look at priority sectors, and some other neighboring states might, if they have a major economic sector in the state, that there'll be state funds that would have a certain allocation or criteria for investing in those sectors in the state, or other R&D support or other types of policy supports. How important do you think those things are in the overall mix, and what would you say would be most important for the state?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's super important. I guess one thought is, I know that the state's done awesome work. Something that comes to mind is like the angel tax credit, which I thought was super cool. Doing more of that kind of work just to motivate more investment and activity there, I think that's a good place to be. So that's one example of something I'd love personally to see more, that kind of creative thinking and forward thinking.
I think the policy environment is such an unbelievably critical piece. And I'm so glad you raised the question and part of the work with the Institute. I think more broadly, right, it's how do we make Minnesota the easiest place to start and sunset a business? How do we incentivize the risk capital? Geof mentioned the angel tax credit, launched Minnesota that was started a few years back. Unfortunately, those were not written into the latest legislative budget, right, for the session that just passed. And we the people of Minnesota need to be the loud voice of surfacing to our policymakers why these matter, because there's so many things that matter. But it truly instrumentally moves the needle for both startup and investor. So I think that's more broadly, right, how do we incentivize? I study what other markets and other countries do as well. Canada, we have a few Canadian investments, and the Canadian government subsidizes up to $250K a year for engineering salaries, right? For example, we've invested in companies that have moved to Buffalo for the 43 North program, which is state dollars flowing through an entity that gives $1 million of capital in exchange for, I think it's 5% of the business, and the company moves to Buffalo for a year, has free space, access to mentorship. So I think just thinking through some of these cool programs, but the policy lens, it just could not be more imperative. And again, we're lucky in Minnesota to have a small enough but big enough geo to test things meaningfully. So I really hope for more.
I think at latitude we're at 45 north, so I think we ought to be able to up it.
There you go.
Any other question? Yeah.
Let me see if I can string a few of these topics and conversations together. So earlier this morning, we heard Y Combinator, about 100 different 1-minute pitches for AI startups. And then just before this, we heard there's the big AI umbrella, with all the different names and funds and acronyms and all that fun stuff. And then we just heard there are 2 startups you just funded with AI in the name. So the question I have is, what kind of rigor, how do you discern the difference between that quality AI company that are really contributing to the community, contributing to whatever, versus the no-code, low-code, the vibe coders who just kind of get something in there? It's a big milieu right now, and I'm really curious to know how you discern the difference between who has the value and who doesn't, and if anybody's really kind of snuck in there and pulled the wool over your eyes.
Great question. Not yet. So hopefully that trend continues. But it's definitely, we try to be really, really good at knowing what we don't know and knowing who can help us figure it out. Right? And so investing broadly across 3 multi-trillion-dollar global industries, there's just a lot in there. And so with healthcare in particular, we try to have 2 or 3 layers of checks and balances. And so on the AI piece, but the tech piece in general, we are able to leverage a lot of technical experts in our broader network. Most recently, for example, for 2 of our healthcare deals, we brought in engineering expert one from Google and one from Scale AI, because we were looking at that company that is similar to Scale AI for healthcare. Like, let's go get one of the founding engineers to help us with tech diligence. So it's trying to understand where the holes could be and who the right technical experts are to help us with that process. From a regulatory legal perspective, then after we complete our diligence, once we make an investment, we actually require all of our healthcare portfolio companies to have 2 layers of counsel, company counsel and healthcare reg counsel, and usually those are 2 different firms, because we can't afford to make a misstep in this segment, whereas if we make one in a company that is building, sustainable packaging, wouldn't be the best, but it's, lives are at stake here. And so we're really trying, but I'm looking at a really interesting company right now that I'm very interested in, that's looking at compliance for AI healthcare specifically, right, for clinical patient workflows. And so I think we're trying to invest beyond what we can see today, because we know the future state requires and demands more regulation. We just don't know what it looks like. So I think it's, in short, trying to know what we don't know and trying to know who to help us along the journey.
Thank you so much, Mary and Geof. And with that, I like to conclude with that we have great infrastructure here in Minnesota. We have great data silos. We have to work together to make work and help build new generation companies and how that can solve some of the medical problems which is there. And for that, the policymakers are here. We are looking to have tomorrow discussion around how we can solve some of the problem we are discussing today with the policymakers and get past that, so that we can have more funding, more ecosystem, and challenging and removing some of the bottleneck here. With that, I'd like to thank both of our panelists as well as audience here for all the questions and patience. Thank you.